What happens when someone lets their arrogance get the best of them? A young receptionist at one of New York's most luxurious hotels thought she had everything under control, until she made a mistake she'd never forget. When a woman dressed in a simple hoodie and sneakers walked into the hotel lobby, the receptionist barely gave her a second glance. To her, this wasn't the kind of guest who belonged in a place like this. Without hesitation, she dismissed her, making it clear that this hotel was only for exclusive clients. What she didn't know, that woman was none other than Sandra Bullock. And things were about to take a turn she never saw coming. Because just when she thought she had the upper hand, the hotel door swung open, and Keanu Reeves walked in. What happened next left the entire lobby silent. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, let us know where you're watching from. Rain poured over New York City, turning the streets into glowing mirrors that reflected the bright lights of passing cars and storefronts. People rushed by, huddled under umbrellas, their footsteps splashing against the wet pavement. Inside La Majestic, one of the city's most exclusive hotels, the chaos of the outside world faded into quiet luxury. The air smelled of fresh jasmine and polished wood, and the soft notes of a grand piano drifted through the lobby. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over sleek marble floors, where well-dressed guests moved with quiet confidence. This was a place designed for the rich and powerful, a place where appearances mattered. Sandra Bullock stepped inside, pulling her hood down slightly lower as she shook off the rain. Her black cap hid most of her face, and her simple sweatshirt and sneakers made her blend in with the city's late-night crowd. To most, she was just another tired traveler looking for a place to rest. But to Sandra, this was routine. She had learned long ago that moving unnoticed was sometimes the easiest way to find peace. She just needed a quiet room for the night before an important event in the morning. Nothing more, nothing less. Behind the reception desk, Heather sat with perfect posture, her sharp eyes scanning every guest who walked through the doors. Young, confident, and always in control, she prided herself on knowing exactly who belonged in a place like this. And in her mind, this woman standing in front of her did not. Heather didn't recognize Sandra. And worse, she didn't care. Sandra walked up to the front desk, her step steady, her expression calm. She had been through this before. The quick glances, the silent judgments. She wasn't in the mood for a confrontation, but she could already sense where this was going. She gave the receptionist a polite nod and spoke in a clear, even tone. "I have a reservation under Sandra Annette." Heather barely looked up. She typed the name into the system, her fingers moving with practiced speed. But as soon as she saw nothing pop up, her brows pulled together in a slight frown. She glanced up at Sandra, her eyes flicking over the hoodie, the simple jeans, the worn sneakers. No designer handbag, no expensive jewelry. Just a woman who, in Heather's mind, clearly didn't belong in a place like this. "I'm sorry," Heather said, her voice cool and professional, but just a little too sharp. "I don't see any VIP reservations under that name." Sandra remained unfazed. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and tapped on her confirmation email. Turning the screen toward Heather, she kept her tone steady. "I have the confirmation here." Heather let out a soft sigh, the kind people use when they want to make sure you know you're being an inconvenience. She didn't immediately take the phone. Instead, she adjusted the papers in front of her, ran a hand down her perfectly pressed blazer, and then, finally, reached for the screen with an exaggerated slowness. She barely glanced at it before setting it back down. "This hotel is for exclusive guests," Heather said, tilting her head ever so slightly. "Are you sure you're at the right place?" A few feet away, a man at the bar shifted his gaze toward the front desk. A couple near the fireplace paused their quiet conversation. Something about the receptionist's tone had caught their attention. Sandra noticed, too. But she didn't react, not yet. Instead, she just stood there, waiting. Heather had no idea that she was seconds away from making the biggest mistake of her career. Sandra took a slow breath, keeping her patience in check. She had dealt with people like this before, the ones who judged first and asked questions later. Without a word, she turned her phone toward Heather again, the reservation details clear on the screen. But Heather barely looked at it. She gave it the same half-second glance as before, then leaned back in her chair, folding her arms as if this whole thing was a waste of her time. "It must be a system error," Heather said, her voice carrying just the slightest hint of fake sympathy. Then, with a small, almost amused smile, she added, "But I can recommend a more affordable hotel nearby." Sandra blinked slowly. That was it. The moment it went from simple rudeness to something much worse. Heather wasn't just stalling. She was trying to get rid of her. Across the room, a man sitting at the bar lowered his drink slightly, his gaze now locked on the front desk. Discreetly, he tilted his phone and snapped a photo. By the fireplace, a couple who had been chatting quietly stopped mid-conversation. The woman leaned in toward her husband, whispering, "Is that Sandra Bullock?" Sandra could feel the shift in the room. People were starting to notice. She wasn't one to seek attention, but right now, it was working in her favor. Heather, however, was still completely unaware of what she had just set in motion. Keeping her voice steady, Sandra spoke again, this time with a sharper edge. "You haven't even checked properly, have you?" Heather's smirk widened slightly, as if she was enjoying the power she thought she had. "I assure you, ma'am, I follow the same process for all our guests." But Sandra wasn't just any guest. And in just a few seconds, Heather was going to find that out the hard way. The hotel door swung open with force, letting in a sharp gust of cold air. A few raindrops scattered onto the marble floor, and the sudden change in temperature sent a small shiver through the room. The soft piano music in the background seemed to fade as all eyes instinctively turned toward the entrance. He walked in. Keanu Reeves, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his crisp white shirt slightly damp from the rain. He moved with the kind of effortless confidence that didn't need to be announced. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. His presence alone shifted the energy in the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. The bartender, who had been polishing a glass, froze in place. Even the couple by the fireplace leaned forward, eyes wide. It was as if time itself had slowed for just a moment. Keanu's gaze swept across the lobby, taking everything in within seconds. Then he saw her, Sandra, still standing at the reception desk, her expression calm but unmistakably tired. And just like that, he smiled, soft knowing. "Did I take too long?" he asked. The words hit like a shockwave. Heather, who had spent the last few minutes acting as if she was the most important person in the room, went completely still. Her breath caught in her throat. Her confidence, so sharp, so untouchable just moments ago, shattered instantly. The woman she had just humiliated, Keanu Reeves, was talking to her like an old friend. A low murmur rippled through the lobby. Someone near the bar let out a hushed, "Oh my God, that is Sandra Bullock." Another voice whispered, and Keanu Reeves just walked in. Heather's face drained of color. The shift was immediate. The power she thought she had was gone, slipping through her fingers like sand. Her hands shook slightly as she turned back to her computer screen, her fingers moving frantically across the keyboard. This time, she was actually searching for the reservation. This time, she was desperate to fix her mistake. But it was too late. Keanu leaned in slightly, resting his hands on the desk in front of Heather. His expression remained calm, but his eyes, sharp and unwavering, left no room for excuses. The lobby was dead silent. No one moved. No one spoke. They were all waiting for what would happen next. Then, in a quiet, measured tone, Keanu asked, "Would this system error have happened if I hadn't shown up?" Heather's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the desk. She wanted to deny it, to explain it away, but she couldn't. Everyone in the room already knew the truth. If Sandra had been alone, she would have been turned away. Before Heather could stutter out a response, a new voice cut through the tension. "What is going on here?" The hotel manager, a middle-aged man in a perfectly pressed suit. He had clearly rushed over the second he realized something was wrong. His eyes darted between Keanu, Sandra, and Heather, his expression shifting from confusion to horror as he pieced it together. He had arrived too late to stop the disaster, but not too late to clean up the mess. "Heather," he said, his voice firm. "In my office. Now." Heather hesitated, But the manager wasn't finished. He turned toward Sandra, his face pale with embarrassment. "Miss Bullock, Mr. Reeves, I deeply apologize. La Majestic does not tolerate discrimination." Then, without looking at Heather, he delivered the final blow. "You're fired." The weight of those words hit harder than anything else. Heather barely managed to hold herself together as she stepped away from the desk, but she could feel the stares burning into her. Meanwhile, across the room, the man at the bar checked his phone. The photo he had taken earlier? It was already spreading. Within minutes, social media was flooded with headlines. "Receptionist humiliates Sandra Bullock. Keanu Reeves' reaction stuns everyone." The world was watching now, and Heather would never escape it. The lobby was still, the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone like a thick cloud. The hotel manager, still flustered, turned to Sandra and Keanu with a forced smile. "On behalf of La Majestic, we'd like to offer you a complimentary stay," he said quickly, desperate to salvage the hotel's reputation. Sandra simply gave a polite but firm smile. "That won't be necessary." She reached for her suitcase, her decision already made. Keanu, without a word, did the same. They had no interest in staying somewhere that had only changed its attitude after realizing who they were. As they made their way toward the exit, Heather was doing the same, but under very different circumstances. She clutched her purse tightly, her steps quick, her face pale. No one stopped her. No one said a word, but she could feel every stare. Her name, once just another receptionist in a luxury hotel, was now spreading across the internet, and not in the way she had ever imagined. Outside, the rain was still falling. Heather stepped onto the sidewalk, her heels clicking against the wet pavement, but she didn't bother pulling out an umbrella. What would have been the point? In the back of a black car, Sandra and Keanu sat quietly as the city lights blurred past them. After a moment, Sandra let out a sigh. "It's not about me," she said softly, looking out the window. "This happens to people every day who don't have someone to step in." Keanu leaned back, watching her. Then, with a small smile, he said, "Maybe today, at least one person learned a lesson." Neither of them said anything else. There was nothing left to say. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more incredible real-life moments that will leave you speechless.